right, so let's say you found this really cool jungle image via Google, and you want to try to work with the palette from it. You enjoy the greens and the yellows and maybe some of that bright red. Don't know yet, but you like the idea of adding that to your sort of editorial swimwear shot. So let's come over here and analyze the palette and then apply it. But then we're going to talk about ways to tweak and modify after we apply, so we can really dial in what we want. So let's start with the analysis. Bottom left button, we let CMX2 analyze. We have a palette. Now, CMX2 was set to 5 samples by default, and it thought, you know what, 5 works. But if you think there might be better options and more diverse color options, then you can increase the samples, right? So you can pull that up, and now you start seeing the greens in there, and the higher you go on samples, now that red appears. If I go all the way to 10, it just kind of shifts around how it analyzes these images. You'll notice that even though I went all the way to 10, it actually didn't give me 10 swatches, because CMX2 has like this great sort of analysis method where it thinks, okay, look, I'm not going to force 10 samples. That's not really like representative of the image that you're asking me to scan. So this is the maximum you get. If it's actually a very minimally diverse image with minimal hue changes and luminosity changes, it might maximize itself at 5 or 6 or even 3 samples. Again, it's trying to give you the best representation of that palette from your image. All right, so with that analyzed, let's go to our target image. Bottom left second button, apply gradient, and there it is. Now, we can play with this in various different ways. Let me give you some examples of why the tools work the way they work. Let's talk immediately about the smoothness slider. Now, you might notice, of course, with this red swatch right here, found in these red flowers and red plants, I should say, in the original image, that creates, right there in that luminosity range of the gradient, it creates quite a red blip, right? And that technically, or usually, ends up being like some banding when you apply it. It gets a little bit more blended in when you use certain blend modes, but if you use other ones like hue, I'm going to switch it to hue. Actually, I'll switch it to color real quick. Okay, I'm going to increase the opacity quite a bit, all the way to maximum. You can see where the red is. It's not blended in, right? So if for some reason you wanted a really strong look, that banding could be giving you a false positive. You're trying to blend in that opacity. You want that look, you like it, but man, that red band, how can you include the red without just completely removing it, of course, but not have this band, right? So yeah, you can click the color to remove it. You can see it's gone. Okay, turn up the opacity some more. Okay, but now I can smooth it out. Smooth it out. And now the red, put a little bit less smoothing. Now the red is still barely in there, but it's just enough that it's causing, it has that red tone in it without being a huge band. Now, I'm not saying this is the greatest look. You may not like this look, and that's okay. I tend to use soft light, but there are lots of other options, of course, that you can use. But even when you're using soft light or something like that, smoothing out that red, because you can see it in there. If you look carefully, you can see it. We smooth it out, and it just kind of melds it in a little bit better. That's the first thing we can do with our smoothing. Now, not all gradients that you extract are going to need it. Some of them are going to be nice and smooth and even, luminosity and, hue wise, they're going to be completely smooth, and that's going to be lovely. But if you do need to smooth it out a little bit, you can. And of course, if you don't want it, you just click the color, at least in this interface. Be sure to watch the video about our advanced tools as well. All right, so let's go ahead and leave the red, but we're going to blend it in just a little bit more. Now, in between these two, this is our sort of input palette, and this is our output palette, if you will. This is showing us what we're actually have applied and what we can apply if we haven't done it yet. And this is what was analyzed. Now, in between them, we have shadows moving to mids all the way to highs. These are ways of deciding where you want this gradient map to be applied in terms of luminosity. Think of it as luminosity mask. It leverages Photoshop's blend if function. So if I were to choose this button right here next to the mids, that is quite a lot of shadows, right? The deep to mid-range shadows. I'm going to put the opacity kind of high. Okay, turn it off and on. This leaves the highlights a little more alone. I can go to the deeper shadows, scales it back even more. So now it's a very subtle palette, all things considered, mostly focused on the shadows, and then the deepest shadows as well. Just at a glance, I can quickly type those in or click on those any way I want. Now the mids, I can apply the tones only to the mids, blends it very nicely. So the shadows and the highlights don't really have any grading on it. That could be the look you want. And you can probably guess what's coming up next. We have most of the highs, the brighter highs, and the brightest highs. Okay. You never know. You can barely see it on this one with the super bright highs. And we can just turn it off. Okay, so scale back that opacity as well. Now level's pretty straightforward. A lot of times, depending on the blend mode that you use, you may want to brighten or darken the actual gradient. This does not darken the image. Your pixels aren't affected. It just brightens the overall gradient that you're applying. Because a lot of times, as you can see here, maybe you consider that from here to here got a little too contrasty. You can just kind of scale that up, and vice versa. You can bring it down on those light palettes that tend to brighten everything, right? Every single option here, you can double click its slider or function label, and it'll reset itself. Now below here, we have 4 main blend modes that tend to be used in gradient map color grading, okay? Just commonly used. In theory, you can apply any of them, and with the advanced editor, you can, okay? But they're just there at a glance, really quick, so you can try them out. In general, soft light gives you a nice color wash with a nice tonal contrast boost. Overlay does the same thing, just more. So if you need more intensity or want more intensity, overlay is a great choice, right? And you can just quickly toggle between soft light and overlay and just see what happens. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it on soft light because that's the one I prefer most of the time, though not always. That's the one I prefer most of the time. Now, I can just keep working from here. If I've decided that this grade is a good start, I can keep working. Keep in mind too, here we have the CMX2 folder, all right, on the layers. But we can add, if this is what we want to do, we can add a selective color on top. For example, it does not matter what we're doing. We can just come in and edit, you know, a little color work, however we feel we want. None of this is required. But let's say something like that. So I've added my own little grade on top of it, but I can always come back to CMX2 and keep adjusting this any way that I feel might be the most beneficial to the look that I want. Always playing around, whether it's, you know, the luminosity range, the blend diff function, whether it's the smoothness, less or more, whether I turn off that red. I can turn off other colors too, by the way. You don't turn off just the red. You can do all kinds of things. You can reduce the samples down to more of a straight yellowish look. You can bring it back up to get that red back. There's so many things that you can do just on this panel, on the main panel, I should say. So you don't have to just apply and be done. There's all kinds of ways you can play around to really dial in the palette, the source that you got from this jungle image over here, and maybe with your own color work on top of that. Like I said, this is designed to be flexible, to be a creative exploration. And this is, like I said, this doesn't even include the advanced functions, which is another video. You should definitely check that out. But CMX2, the entire premise is about finding a palette that you like from an image or many, putting it on yours, and then adjusting until that inspiration clicks and you go, nailed it.